Good evening and welcome to our webinar titled ABCs for Building a Timber Frame Home. I would like to thank Timbercraft for sponsoring tonight's event. For more than 40 years, Timbercraft has achieved the highest level of satisfaction by creating homes that fulfill your dreams in both form and function. Timbercraft's goal is to help you create a place that is built for your life. Visit timbercraft.com to learn more and view their timber frame home plans. Our speaker for this evening is Bob Sternquist. A fifth-generation builder, you could say timber framing is in Bob's blood. Born and raised in Los Angeles, California, he worked in the building trades with his father all his life, including a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to help build the Olympic Village when LA hosted in 1984. Bob hadn't planned to remain in the building trades, but as fate would have it, after moving to Michigan in 1996, he was introduced to timber framing and fell in love with the art, beauty, and majesty of this ancient craft. He grew Timbercraft from humble beginnings with a single location in the Midwest to a multi-state enterprise with two full design and fabrication shops, one in the Midwest and the other in Washington State. In timber framing, Bob's found his passion and his life's work, his dedication to bring your dream home to life. Before we get started, I do want to let you know that we will save time at the end of the event to answer questions. Questions can be submitted in the question area on the right side of your screen in the control panel. Bob, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you, Amanda. And good evening, everyone. How are you? And welcome to our webinar, The ABCs of Building a Timber Frame Home. In this webinar today, we're going to go over a couple of key things that I think are going to help you as you go through the process of building a timber frame. Part of what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the two different styles of timber framing that we have as a timber framing industry. And from there, we're going to talk about the differences in the different wood species that are available for you to be able to build your home. The other thing we're going to do is we're going to show you some examples of different styles of trusses that are commonly used when we're building these timber frame homes. And from there, we're also going to talk about design. And in particular, we're going to talk about what role timber framers play in the design and what portion of the design we must do versus whether should we do the entire project. And from there, I also want to talk about the different enclosure systems that you'll typically find with these timber frame homes. And from there, I want to cover 2 points that sometimes get missed in the budgeting and understanding the overall process of building a timber frame home. But again, to formally introduce myself, my name is Bob Sternquist. I am the president and CEO here at Timbercraft. My wife and I have owned Timbercraft for just shy of 20 years. And really, building timber frame homes has been one of the greatest blessings in my life. And one of the neatest things about building a timber frame is where you guys build these timber frame homes. Occasionally we're in a subdivision, but most commonly we're out on special bluffs or lakes or cliffs. And some of the unique corners where I've built these timber frame homes, it has been so much fun over the last 20 years to build these. I've built timber frames in Kodiak Island, Alaska, all the way to Florida and everywhere in between. So it's been a lot of fun to build these timber frames. And the other thing that's unique about a timber frame is a lot of these homes that we're building for our customers are very unique structures and very important to them. Oftentimes we're building a legacy house, a special dream home, the final home, and it's an honor and a privilege to be able to be part of that process as we go through. And in any way, if at any point we can help you with that, all of us here at Timbercraft would love that opportunity. So let's go ahead and I'll tell you a little bit about Timbercraft. Our company was founded in 1978 by Judith and Charles Landau in a cool little town called Port Townsend, Washington. They're in the Pacific Northwest. One of the things that we do here at Timbercraft is we design and build both residential and commercial structures. Predominantly, we build more residential, probably about 80–85% of what we do are residential homes. But one of the things that makes Timbercraft very unique here is that we have 2 CNC milling machines. It's the Hundigger, and the version of the Hundigger we have, there's only 4 particular models of this Hundigger in North America, and we have 2 of them, which allows Timbercraft to be one of the fastest and most accurate manufacturers in the industry. But what's also important that we do here is that we have full in-house and design, which allows us to design structures in all 50 states as well as all throughout Canada. And we're affiliated with an engineering firm that allows us to build everywhere in North America. Anyway, so let's go ahead and let's dive into the presentation here. What exactly is a timber frame home? And and I want to be super clear, a timber frame is not a log home. And honestly, the fact of the matter is, many of you have driven past dozens, maybe hundreds of timber frames and not realized that it's a timber frame home, because the key to a timber frame isn't necessarily what's happening on the outside of the house. Now, I'd like to show you my house. I live in a flyover state of Michigan. If you fly to New York, Boston, you fly right over my house. I live on 30 acres. And as you can see, my house is a typical country Victorian house, and you would have no idea that it's a timber frame, because the key is really what's happening on the inside. And this is the inside of my kitchen. So the timber frame is the exposed structural skeleton for the building. Now, some of the advantages of building a timber frame, and I'll compare it to, let's say, a log home. One of the biggest advantages is the maintenance that a timber frame has compared to a log home. When you have wood outside, be it a log or a 2x4, you're going to have some perpetual level of maintenance. But with a timber frame, our timbers are on the inside. So God willing, you're not going to have the same sort of maintenance that you're going to have with a log home. Now, for example, living out in the country on a 55-mile-per-hour dirt road, the level of maintenance I have at my house is actually dusting. When my neighbors come down Moore Road and they're zooming along, they look like top fuel dragsters with this major cloud of dust billowing up behind them. So truly, extension duster is about the biggest amount of maintenance I have. Now, when my son was younger, now he's launched and he's a Marine, but when he was younger, he was a boy. He played outside, he got dirty, and he would love to run in the house after being outside and grab onto a post and propel himself into the great room. So the only other bit of maintenance I had to do a while back was to wash his fingerprints off of the timbers. So that's one of the advantages that timber frames actually offer. Another important thing, and this was probably more important for my wife, is that I'm a woodworker. I love wood floors, wood walls, wood ceiling, but for my wife, that was too much wood. So one of the things that she really liked and what inclined her into the timber frames is the fact that she could have drywall, stone, colors, all kinds of different odds and ends, which just didn't make it, too much wood dominating the structure. But one of the coolest things about a timber frame is a process that we call a hybrid. A hybrid allows us as timber frame manufacturers to build a timber frame for anyone's budget. And the way we accomplish that is by focusing the timber framing in the high use areas of the home. Now, a lot of people are surprised to learn that timber framing is the oldest documented style of construction there is literally in the world. In fact, it dates all the way back to the Old Testament, where King Solomon hired the Sidonians, who specialized in felling timbers, to come build his temple. And not that what we're doing in the timber frame industry, building a temple for the Lord, it's not that important, but what we are doing now is kind of the same way. Timber frame manufacturers are located in different states, and it's not uncommon that we deliver all around the country in different areas. And the timber framing industry is kind of the same way. Now, one thing that's very important to understand is that anything built prior to 1860, 1870 is a timber frame home. That was the main style of construction. Whatever trees were on the lot were cleared, they were cut, the joinery was added, and that's how the homes were built. But in the 1860s, 1870s, timber framing took a big step back. And the main reason for that is we got into the mass production of 2x4s, 2x6s, the square head nail. And timber framing took a step back because it's a lot easier to throw a 2x6 over your shoulder than an 8x8 Douglas fir or oak timber. But in the 1970s, there was a group of people like Charles Landau, who was our founder, Frank Baker over at Riverbend, and Ted Benson, are kind of the pioneers that helped revitalize the timber frame industry and bring it to where we are today. So all of us in the timber frame industry are very grateful for those gentlemen that helped rebuild the timber frame industry. Now, here in the United States, the oldest documented timber frame is the Gonzalez Alvarez house, which is in St. Augustine, Florida. As you'll see on the screen on the left, this is a rendering that was done of the house back in the 1800s. And to the right is a contemporary photo of this house. This is an old timber frame building. The reason this building is still standing is because at any point when there were holes in the roof and the shingles needed to be fixed, or there was issues with the siding, they were fixed. Some of these old barns that you see out in the country that are falling down and collapsing, that are timber frame barns, The main reason that's happening is the elements are getting in there. They're rotting out the wood and they're collapsing. But if you keep the elements off, a timber frame home is not going to last just a couple of decades. It's going to last a couple of 100 years. And that's really neat about timber framing. So in our industry, there's two different styles of joinery that you're going to come across. One's referred to as post and beam, the other is mortise and tenon timber framing. And basically, post and beam has metal fasteners where oak pegs hold the other together. But let's dive into that a little bit more. So post and beam, and this is a picture of post and beam, is where you're using steel to bolt things together, steel plates. Now, for some of you that are living on the West Coast and you're in areas where there's seismic conditions, maybe you're considering building up in the mountains of Colorado where there's really extreme snow loads. Part of what we have to do as timber framers is do a style of post and beam because the wood joinery can't handle earthquakes in areas like that. Now, the other style of timber framing is traditional mortise and tenon timber framing. And this is literally where the tenon plugs in and a wooden dowel is driven in, and that's what holds the structure together. Now, I'm asked a lot of times, what's more cost effective? Is it the mortise and tenon? Is it the steel? Well, for us, Timbercraft, traditional joinery is most common. If you look at this photo here, where the rafter comes into the post, we have two pegs holding that together. We charge $2 a peg. So the connection for the post to the rafter is a $4 connection. But if you compare that to post and beam, the steel plate is probably $40. And maybe you're doing plates on both sides, and then consider the hardware. So ultimately, whichever style appeals to you, we will do. But when we do build on the West Coast, we tend to do mortise and tenon everywhere where we can, and then use the steel joinery from there. But it's personal preference. But here at Timbercraft, we are traditional timber framers, and our preference would be to do mortise and tenon joinery. So let's talk about the wood species that are commonly used in our industry. Douglas fir here at Timbercraft, that was the first wood species that we were building with. We started doing that over 40 years ago. When I took over at Timbercraft, I brought some of the Midwest wood into our production, which is the oak and the pine. Cedar is another wood species that is used to build timber frames. However, with some of the things that are happening, most of the cedar comes out of Canada, and with everything that's happening in the world, bringing that material in from Canada has actually made cedar probably one of the more expensive wood species to be able to use. Now, to explain how timbers are cut, you will see here in this photo, this shows in the center, this is called box heart. That's where we're cutting a timber and the heart is located in it. Now, some of the other pieces are what's referred to as free of heart timbers, and I want to explain that and go into greater detail. Now, this here is a Douglas fir tree, and this is a picture of our Douglas fir log before it's manufactured, before it's sawn down. Now, the gentleman standing next to the log is 6 feet tall, so the diameter of the trees that we're harvesting are absolutely enormous. So what we're typically getting in Douglas fir is referred to as free of heart. So when you look at the piece of wood, you don't actually see the heart. And when you remove the heart, when the wood dries, it's going to check or crack. You're going to get little pencil line checks with Douglas fir. Now, maybe you're considering building a more rustic style of structure. If that's the case, oak and pine might be a good wood species to work with because they have the heart in it. And where the stress in wood is in the heart. And as it dries, it will check, it'll twist, as you can see. Now, structurally, there's nothing wrong with checking. That's just what wood does as it dries. It also shrinks around the waist, and we'll go into that a little bit more. But regardless of whichever wood species you want to build with, there are these different variables that come along. Now, most of what we're doing as a timber frame industry is we're working with green timbers. And when we say green, we're talking about timbers that have been recently harvested and brought into the facility to be manufactured. Here at Timbercraft, the oak and pine that we deal with, we bring in green timbers because the wood hasn't checked. It's nice and stable. It's very easy for us as manufacturers to cut accurate joinery. Now, the next one down here is air dried or seasoned timbers. A lot of what we utilize in Douglas fir fits this model. And the reason for that is all of our Douglas fir comes off the coast of Oregon. It's a coastal dense. And the yard where we ship it to and then it's bandsawed down is in the desert. So it's actually drying and it's cooking. And because it's a free of heart wood species, it doesn't have the same stress to want to twist and turn. So I think if you're considering a truss like you see here where there's some big arches, a good wood where you have the curves, a good wood species would be Douglas fir. But again, if you want something a little bit more rustic, I think oak and pine will be wonderful options for you. But as we begin to go down this list, the cost and the materials are going to go up a little bit more. One of your options is to get what's referred to as radio frequency dried or microwave timbers. And the reason why this tends to be a very expensive way to go simply has to do with the kiln drying process itself. And the best analogy I've used all these years is cooking a hot dog in a microwave. We've all done it before. What actually happens to that hot dog? Put it on a plate, cook it for a minute. What does that hot dog look like? The moistures come out, it's checked, it twisted and turned a little bit. Well, timbers do the exact same thing. However, because as timbers dry and they check, they actually shrink around the waist. Certain timbers like oak will shrink maybe 3/8 of an inch. So as the timber shrinks and it cooks and the checks happen, what we have to do, we have to put in a larger piece of wood. So where the expense in kiln drying is, if I need a 10 by 10 post, I'll probably put a 12 by 12 in the kiln. I'll cook it. It'll do what it's going to do. We then pull it out and we bandsaw it down to a usable size piece of wood. So sometimes we're cutting 15–20% of that wood off just because we need a straight piece of wood. So there's part of the expense. Certainly the microwaving the wood for 30 to 60 days, there's certainly expense with that. But one of the things that sometimes people get misled on is they believe, hey, I have a kiln, I'm paying extra for a kiln dry frame. My frame's all done checking, and that's not true. See, where kiln drying really makes sense is particularly with trim, tongue and groove, smaller pieces of wood where that drying process can go all the way through. Now, if you actually read the fine print on kiln drying timbers, the kiln drying is penetrating about 2.5 inches all the way around that piece of wood after we bandsawed it. So if you have a 10 by 10 timber and you're kiln drying it, the outside's dry, the inside still has moisture. So you're still going to have some shrinkage, some checking, and some movement. For us here at Timbercraft, we use dry material for our staircases and treads and areas like that where we don't want any movement. We want it nice and sound. But radio frequency kiln dried is an option you can go through. Typically, it'll add in the neighborhood of about 30% additional to the cost of your project. Another option, and this one is a fun option, but it's actually the most expensive, is working with reclaimed timbers. And the reason why reclaimed timbers are expensive is somebody had to go tear down a barn. And usually to use reclaimed, you're going to end up buying 15 to 20% additional wood, because as you begin to bring these timbers in, you're going to realize certain areas have rot, certain areas like that. But also the production process on a reclaimed timber frame, it's a beautiful frame, but it's going to cost more, because basically where's their cost in timber framing? The cost in timber framing is wood and production time. It's a pretty simple equation. But the production time on a reclaimed timber, because these timbers have twisted, they've turned a little bit, you oftentimes have to do a system called mapping, where though you have an 8x8, it may be coming into the post at an angle like this. And oftentimes these old beams were cut in the 1800s, where it may be a 7x7 and at the other end an 8x8. So you don't have the same consistency in sizes, and it takes longer to lay out a reclaimed frame, but man, they're a lot of fun and they're actually very, very pretty to look at. But why is joinery so important? The reason joinery is so important is because as wood dries, it's going to do all that movement. See, the way timber frames were initially built is it was the original style of construction. All of these timber posts and these skirts were put on the foundation wall, and then they were covered with lath and plaster. And oftentimes with timber frames, you only see the roof system up there. However, what we've learned as an industry and what we're doing now is instead of having the timbers on the buried behind drywall, we've moved them into the structure. So the joinery is more important now than ever. Now, here's an example of a piece of oak that we cut this fall. Now, as it's dried, you can see how the check is moved and how it's twisting and turning. Everyone that you see advertising at Timber Home Living are excellent manufacturers. You're going to get a great timber frame from them. However, where you're going to see the quality and craftsmanship isn't necessarily year 1, year 2. It's year 3, 4, 5, 10, and 12. The attention to detail and paying attention how these timbers dry. See, the very first timber frame that I cut, it was an oak timber frame. And one very exciting thing happened. This magazine actually published it and had it on the front cover. And they called me up and said, hey, we love your scouting photos. We want to come photo shoot your house. Now that customer happens to still be on my current referral list. It's a special project. It was my very first timber frame. But when it was laid out on sawhorses, the joints were so tight. We had a post, we had a tenon. The girt came in. It was so tight, a crisp dollar bill wouldn't fit in there. But then I enclosed the house with some super energy efficient SIPs panels. And when I went back, I saw the checking, the twisting, and the turning, and I was almost mortified at what the joinery looked like. So one of the things that we did here at Timbercraft is we said, stop, hold on a second. How can we make our joinery look better? And the way that we do that is through a process called house joinery. Here are 2 photos of some timbers that we were manufacturing this week here at Timbercraft. And you'll notice that there's mortises for the tenons, but the whole member is placed in a pocket. Now, my structural engineer wants me to point something out right here, right now. He wants to point out, instead of it just being a tenon sliding into the post and you have the tension and reaction, he loves the fact that it's in a pocket. It's now a stronger joint. It's got a bearing point, and he wants me to promote that. But the truth is, the main reason why we do it is aesthetically, it's much prettier. Now here's an example of a non-house joint. Now this timber looked great the day it was delivered. However, as it dries, as it checks, you'll see the separation and gaps that actually occur. So this is a traditional Morrison tenon joint. However, here at Timbercraft, we use the house joint. And even though we work with a wood species like Douglas fir, which doesn't shrink or twist nearly the same, we still house our joints because personally we believe if it's not tight, it's not right. So some of the other things that may influence the wood species you're going to be building with is going to be the location. Now, certain areas will have heavier design criteria. Now, one of the things that I hear all the time every year, customers go up and go, how come you don't put the cost of your timber frame on the website? Because it's impossible for any of us at any company to know exactly what the timber frame is going to cost, because we don't know if there's going to be a heavy snow load. We don't know if you're going to be building in areas where there's hurricanes and things like that. So areas that have those higher wind loads and whatnot, you're going to want to use a wood species that's able to handle that. Now here's an example of one of the things that I do. Every single project that I get and I need to estimate, I look up exactly where the house is located. So this is a snapshot of the Midwest and the upper Northeast. Now, as you'll see these different numbers, those are what are called live loads. They tell us how heavy is the snow that we need to design for. Now, I live in the state of Michigan, and I live just 12 miles above the Ohio border. Every 20 minutes, 25 minutes I drive north, you'll notice that number gets bigger because there's a greater snow load. So the size of the beams for every single timber frame we design, the beams get bigger. Now maybe you're building out in the Midwest where most everything's 20, 25 pounds. That's a much simpler design criteria, and all kinds of different wood species will actually work in an area like that. So let's talk about the different strength capabilities of each wood. Now, Douglas fir and oak are going to be your strongest wood species, but a lot of people are surprised that a softwood like Douglas fir is actually stronger than oak. But what actually happens is the oak weighs almost double what the Douglas fir does. Oak weighs 6 pounds a board foot, where Douglas fir weighs 3.2. It just basically means that the oak is going to bend or deflect just a little bit sooner than the Douglas fir. So those are 2 really good wood species. Pine, you'll read on the internet, is one of the more economical per board foot timbers for us to buy. man, it can barely hold itself up. It can't do the same span capabilities. In fact, many years ago at the Log and Timber Show in Minneapolis, when we were down at the Dome, there was a good handcraft timber framer that was there, and they had a 20-foot wide hammer beam, an enormous truss that was 24 feet tall, and they had a crane in there actually lifting this thing. I couldn't believe how big of a display they were building, and I went over and I chatted with them. I said, man, I love this. I can't believe you built something this big, but I got to ask you a question. Our boots are 10 foot deep. You only span this truss 6 feet. Why do you have that? And he goes, well, we're actually building way up in northern Minnesota where there's heavy snow loads. It's actually in what they call a case study area, a lot of snow. So to be able to make that span, they have hammer beam trusses every 6 feet, which is beautiful joinery, but however, to me, it had a little bit of that never-ending look to it. Where typically with a lot of these trusses, we're spacing them 10, 12, 14, maybe even 16 feet apart. So pine is usable. However, it doesn't work very well in areas where there's heavy snow loads. Now, western red cedar, personally, I believe that's the prettiest wood species in the entire world, but it is the weakest wood species. That's why you typically see it for tongue and groove, shingles, areas like that. Very rarely do we see big structural cedar, western red cedar timber frames being built. So let's talk about designing the timber frame home for you. Now, one of the things I really want to communicate here is the person you want to work with, be it the timber frame manufacturer, a home designer, or an architect, you ultimately want to find somebody who can take what's in your heart and in your mind and translate that onto the set of plans and design your home. Absolutely, that's the best person to do it. However, you do want to consider involving the timber framer early on, because every single timber frame that we design here at Timbercraft, we have to redraw the foundation. We have the big structural point loads that the timber frame has, and we need to account for it. The other thing that happens, and one of the advantages I think in using an in-house company like Timbercraft that has in-house design and engineering, is we know exactly what timber frames cost. We know how much of the budget can be allocated. And it's not likely that an architect will necessarily know what Timbercraft charges. Another advantage is certainly going to be we have an understanding of the engineering in this, and we also have a great understanding of what the span capability are that we're able to achieve with the timber frame. Now, over 10 years ago, I did the Log and Timber Show in Charlotte, North Carolina, and unbeknownst to me, I had connected with a customer in the audience when I was teaching the timber frame workshop, and she had made a decision at that moment. She was going to hire me. She was going to hire our company to actually build her timber frame. And we just briefly met in my booth. She actually shared, Bob, I'm really excited. I'll be in contact with you in a few months. Looking forward, I really, really want a timber frame. Well, she ended up working with an architect and designed a beautiful set of plans. I mean, she spent upwards of $20,000 designing a timber frame. Now, when I got these plans in the mail, it actually gave me the idea I was probably going to build the timber frame, because it said, see, Bob Stern was at Timbercraft for timber frame details. But the one thing that I had noticed is she wanted a particular style of truss called the hammer beam. Now, this truss actually needs a 1.5 story eave height, because there are timbers that come flying into the room. But her architect knew that she wanted timber framing, but she didn't check with us. She didn't ask what size eave heights. And so when I got these plans and I saw that the architect had designed just under a 9-foot eave height, I realized that she couldn't have hammer beams. So when I did the proposal, I sent over some different trusses, and she said, Bob, no, I need the hammer beam. That's what I want. Well, what I had to share with a customer who had spent over $20,000 designing her house, we had to go back and redesign her house if she had to have that particular truss. But had she picked up the phone, or the architect had picked up the phone and involved us early in the process, we could have shared that information with her. So depending upon who you're going to go with, when you decide, yes, this person's going to design my house, you should also be saying, yes, this is going to be the manufacturer who's going to build my timber frame home. So your options in designing a timber frame, you can certainly do a full frame, but most of what we're doing as an industry is a hybrid timber frame, focusing those timbers in the high use areas of the home. Now, a hybrid timber frame as a timber framer describes it and as a log home company describes it are very different. Most log home companies describe hybrids as timber frame trusses that they have, but oftentimes they'll build a conventional roof system on top of it, so they're only using the timbers aesthetically. However, those of us in the timber frame side of the world, we actually consider a hybrid using the timber frame structurally in certain areas of the home. Look, I own Timbercraft and I don't live in a fully timber frame home. I timber frame my great room, my kitchen, my loft, my master bedroom, and I focus the timbers in those areas because guess what, guys? I didn't have an endless budget. I focused the timbers in those areas. Now, other areas, laundry rooms, closets, I didn't put the timbers. But don't get me wrong, we have the equipment here. If you want a full timber frame, I'll build you the coolest timber frame laundry room in the state. But does it really make sense to put timbers there? Focus the timber framing in the high use areas. And with a hybrid timber frame, I can build anyone that has a realistic budget a timber frame home. But I am going to show that certain areas where we may not want to put the timbers. So what I'd like to do now is show you some different styles of bents. And in timber framing, the word bent is a truss with legs. And where is their cost in timber framing? It's going to be production time and wood. So as you look at the simple bent is very straightforward. There's not a lot of joinery here, but we're looking at a style of bent that's a clear span. It doesn't have a post coming down in the middle. So its application is going to be for a design that may be 15, 16, 18 feet wide. Now the next one here, this is called the queen post. The queen post is a clear span, but now we're seeing a style of truss that has 2 queens in it. 4 more joints. So now we're seeing a truss that's slightly more expensive, but we're seeing a style of clear span truss that can span 24, 26, maybe 28 feet. Now here's a picture of a queen post that we were pre-fitting today, where it was over 30 feet wide. To accomplish that, you see how we added the additional post in the middle. Now the next one here, this is the king post bent. This, I've come to learn, is the oldest style of truss, and it is the strongest truss that is made. It has support for the ridge. It also has the struts to help support the rafters. But I learned that this is the oldest style of truss that there is in timber framing. Back in 2010, I went on a Holy Land tour with my parish. I wanted to see where all the miracles in the Bible happen. And I was reading, oh, I'm going to go in this church. It's 600 years old. This church is 400 years old. And I know that anything built prior to 1860 is a timber frame. But the moment I walked through the very first church doors and looked up, this was the style of truss that all those churches had. The only thing they were doing a little bit different several hundred years ago, they had more struts to help support the rafter. So this is truly one of the oldest style of trusses, but one of the cool things about this truss is there's all kinds of little odds and ends that you can actually do to it. For example, here's an example of an arch bottom king post. For the city of Bellevue in Washington, I actually did a straight bottom cord and oversized and cut arches in the rafter to give them a rounded roof. So there's all kinds of little tricks to the trades that we can utilize with these trusses. Now, here's an example of another clear span bent. This is called the scissor bent. This is a project that we did for Adrian College. This is actually a room where they do all of their working out. It's a very nice room, probably helps with recruiting for their different sports that they do there. But this scissor, the reason why this one happens to be spanning 30 feet is we ended up adding a couple more timbers. We added a king there to help support the ridge, and you notice we added some more webbing. So that's how, with that clear span, we were able to go to a wider 30-foot area. Now this next one I'm going to show you is called the 3-post bent. The 3-post bent is clearly not a clear span. It's got a post coming down in the middle. And this truss that you see up here, this is probably a 32, 34-foot wide truss that we built. And then the last one here is the 4-post bent. Now the 4-post bent is not a clear span. This is a picture of a project that we actually built over in Missouri, and this is a 40-foot wide area where we use the 4 posts. And to be able to go that wide, that's why we have those posts. But one of the things that you can do with all of these different trusses, you can mix and match all of these trusses. Now, for example, in my great room, at the end of my great room, I have a 4-post bent. I have a fireplace in the middle. I have windows down low, and because I'm a bird hunter, I have some different mounts that are actually mounted up there. So I'm 25 feet wide, and I have a 4-post bent. Proceed 10 feet into my great room. I have a king post. I didn't want a post coming down. I wanted a clear span style of truss. Then proceed another 10 feet as we get near my bar and we get into areas that support the second floor. I went to a 3-post. So you can mix and match all these different styles of trusses. Now, this one right here is called the hammer beam. The hammer beam is a very unique style of clear span truss because this one isn't actually limited to how wide you can go. You can build, and I have built over 50-foot wide hammer beams. But the way that we achieve that, for example, the Holy Trinity Church up in Juneau, Alaska, that one was a 50-foot wide worship hall. But the way we achieved it, those verticals are queens. We added more queens, and we just transfer the load out there. So it's a beautiful style of truss, but let's be honest, there's more pieces. It'll take a little bit longer for us to build, and you notice that there's multiple decorative pendant ends, and those take a little bit of time. So these are the different styles of trusses and bents that you'll see in the industry. But one of the best tools that I have found is customers come in and they want to design a house, and I don't get paid for this plug, is the magazine that's actually putting this on. Timber Home Living does a tremendous job of going around not only to Timbercraft, but to all the manufacturers and sampling our work. I can't tell you how many customers come in with pictures they printed off the internet, or maybe they're getting the physical magazine and they're tearing those out. It's a tremendous tool that will sample all kinds of different styles of trusses. I mean, a few years ago, there was a king post truss that we built, but a customer had shown me a photo at a Timber Home Living how there was a decorative arch beam that went through the webbing. It just added some more artistic flair to it. So it's a great resource, and it's one you should consider as you consider going through this whole process. So one of the things I do want to talk about real quickly is this upcoming April 18th, we're going to be doing another webinar, and this is the designing a timber frame specifically for your budget. We're going to show you how you can go through the process and design a timber frame, because a lot of people will ask the questions, is it $200 a square foot? Is it $250 a square foot? There's no way to answer that. But if we design a timber frame around a budget, we know the percentages that you can allocate and make sure that you get it there and you're actually able to build. So let's move on. Let's talk about designing the walls and roofs specifically to enclose your timber frame. There's all kinds of different options that you can actually do when you do this. For example, stick frame construction. You can absolutely stick frame around, but one of the things that you're going to find, a lot of timber frame companies use a product called SIPs, structurally insulated panels. And let's dive into the SIPs a little bit. Basically, what a SIP is 2 layers of OSB and foam in the middle. Believe it or not, individually, a SIP like this, structurally, you virtually have nothing when they're separated, but the moment they're adhered together, it basically becomes an I-beam. It's 3 times stronger and 6 times more energy efficient. And the reason why timber frames tend to use this product is because timber frames are these tall vaulted structures which need energy efficiency. Well, you can actually build a SIP home just with SIPs. However, SIPs they can't levitate. They need wood to sit on. They need heavy timber ridges, trusses, common rafters. So timber frames need energy efficiency. SIPs need structural timbers, thus the happy marriage with the structurally insulated panel. Now in our industry, there's 2 different styles of SIPs that you'll come across. One is referred to as expanded polystyrene, and that's what I have here. Basically, the way that this is made, it's a laminated process. So the top skin and the bottom skin are glued together. The thicker the foam, the greater the R value that you get. Now with SIPs, with EPS SIPs, basically these are kind of like the Henry Ford. They're the original version of SIPs. They're great SIPs. They're still used today. But the way that they're made is at 16 inches and 42 inches or horizontal home runs or raceways where you can pull electric. Now some of the companies are actually beginning to cut out for the electrical boxes. But one of the things that can be a challenge, and if you talk to electricians, they'll get a little frustrated with SIPs because it's difficult for them to pull the wires and put remodeling boxes in. It's one of the challenges with SIPs. However, At Timbercraft, we utilize something called a polyurethane SIP. The way that this is manufactured is very, very different. We actually put the electrical boxes, conduit, whatever we structurally need to add to the panels, we will add that ahead of time and then inject it with foam. So if you can think of it, we'll build it. I mean, for example, one of the things I did at my house when we built on, I went ahead and put plugs up in my eaves to be able to turn my Christmas lights on and off just from a light switch. And I like to tell a little story. Back in 2003, 2004, Modern Builder, I was reading about these new refrigerators that were most likely going to be coming out. And you wanted to have a phone jack behind your refrigerator where you could plug in your fridge, and it would modem out when you're out of mayonnaise and create the shopping list. And you know, it was going to be the wave of the future. And so as a timber frame manufacturer and designing SIPs, I thought, man, I want to be ahead of the curve. And so I added phone jacks behind probably 40 or 50 homes scattered all around the United States because I thought I was ahead of the curve. And at this point, I wonder if people are probably going, who's the moron that put the phone jack behind the fridge? Well, that would be me, because I was trying to be ahead of the curve and put those boxes in. So if you can think of it, you can do it. One of the other things that's really neat about the polyurethane SIPs, and I'll specifically speak about the Timbercraft SIPs that we're designing, is that we use something called a jumbo panel. So if you look here, you'll see that this isn't a 4x8 panel. We use large 8x24 sheets of OSB. So we're setting large sections of roof very quickly. Basically what we're trying to do is we're trying to design a house. Instead of the furnace turning on every 10 to 12 minutes, or maybe you're living down south where it's not necessarily heat, it's air conditioning, but instead of that kicking on so often, we're trying to design a house where the furnace or AC turns on instead of every 10, 15, every 30 or 40 minutes. Basically, the concept is kind of like an igloo cooler, and we're building an igloo cooler around your home. So the SIPs are a tremendous thing to add to your project, but it can also, for us as timber frame manufacturers, be a tad bit difficult for us to sell, because one of the things that SIPs do is where general contractors make their money is actually in stick framing around a structure. But when we sell SIPs, we're taking a major portion of their revenue away. After the timber frames are wrecked and the SIPs are on, oftentimes they only have a day in stick framing interior partition walls. So for us, it's a little bit difficult sometimes to get contractors to understand, hey, this is the latest and greatest. It's 3 times stronger. It's 6 times more energy efficient. If you use my polyurethane, it's a fire-rated foam. It doesn't burn. The house won't burn down. So that's one of the challenges all of us that utilize the SIPs face. So let's talk about some of the different R values that you get. Now, the expanded polystyrene, which again is the original style of SIP, a typical 6.5-inch wall to meet the new energy efficient codes is R24. Now, different EPS manufacturers may say, you know, their panels are R25 or it's a R32. But as you notice these different sizes in EPS, you see the thicker the panel, the greater R value that you end up getting. Now with the polyurethane panels, because it's a denser foam, we get a higher R value. Typically here at Timbercraft, we utilize the 6.5-inch on the walls and the roof. So we have an R40 wall, R40 roof. This is really important. Now, about 5 years ago, here in the county where I live, we had a massive ice storm come in, and it literally dropped all the power all throughout the county for 2 days. So everything iced up, and then the temperatures dropped about another 10 to 12 degrees. It was close to 15 to 18 degrees, and there was no power. It didn't matter which way you went out of my driveway, you drove over down power lines. Well, one of the things that was really neat about the SIPs on my house, going with the R40 walls and roof, is the passive solar that we ended up getting from our windows and bringing heat in. And I don't want to make 48 degrees sound warm, but my pipes never froze because of the passive solar. The R values that you get with these are amazing. Now, all of us have driven past a home where there's a hard frost or a light snow up on the roof, and you look up and you can actually see lines in the roof. And you see snow, but then you see melted lines. Well, it's a compliment to the general contractor. He did a phenomenal job of insulating in between those rafters. But every time you have a rafter, the heat hits it and escapes out. And that's the concept with the SIP. We're trying to design a house that has minimal 2x lumber in it, so it's a solid foam all throughout. So it'll be phenomenally cheaper for you to heat and cool your house, but also your home is 3 times stronger than a stick built. So it's really a win-win for you when you build these homes. So I want to jump back to hybrids, and the reason I'm going to jump back to hybrids is because hybrids are really where the direction of this industry is going. And again, focusing the timber framing in the high use areas of the home. I'd like to show you some examples of different hybriding on some of the projects in the year of 2018 that we ended up building. This is a project that we did in Montana. Beautiful Douglas fir timber frame, but as you can see, the general contractor was having to stick frame bit by bit and put the studs up. One of the reasons why I think it's a little bit tough to stick frame around a timber frame is usually builders have the subfloor on. They can build a wall and stand up the whole wall. But when you have timbers, you don't have that option. You almost have to balloon frame stud by stud by stud. General contractors don't want to lose that revenue, so that's one of the challenges that we have. Here's another example. The one on the left is a project we did in Missouri. The one on the right is a project that we actually built in Cleveland, Ohio. One of the things that we always try and do, if a builder wants to stick frame the walls, we want to make sure that we do utilize the SIPs on the roof, because we don't want to see the snow. We don't want to see those lines in the roof. And the other thing is, part of what you're buying when you're buying a timber frame is a piece of art. And it'll only take us 3 or 4 days to erect a timber frame. We'll put the walls and roof up, or we'll put the roof on top of it. We'll put the tongue groove on. We want to cover this piece of art that we built for you, because if the contractor is going to go ahead and stick frame, we know it's going to take him double the time because the timbers are going to be in the way. Here's another example of hybriding. Again, focusing that timber frame in the high use areas. And you can see here on the left-hand side in this project in California where everything was stick frame. This right here was a unique project, the one on the right. This one happened to be in North Carolina. This was a job where we had a challenge. The customer wanted a full-size hammer beam bent covered porch, but the contractor wanted to stick frame the wall. So one of the things I had to ask the contractor to do is, while I raised the timber frame, I needed that one wall built. That way I could attach my timbers to it ahead of time. So when you've got a timber frame SIP company and you've got a general contractor, there's some coordination, and that's why I really believe in using the SIPs. Now, this is an example of a house here on the left that I was the general contractor on. It's a local house around the corner. Now, I personally believe any vaulted ceiling, you use the SIPs. You can't beat it in conventional construction. But I also like to use the SIPs on all of the exterior walls because I want the stronger, I want the energy efficiency. However, there is one part where I don't believe in using the SIPs. If there's a portion of your home where you want flat ceilings, maybe in your breezeway, this was a house. This house was a project where the bathroom, the master bath, and in her master, she didn't want that vaulted. She wanted lower, more intimate ceilings. In that application, we went ahead, we used the conventional trusses. Once we put, and in her bedroom, I actually did a couple of timbers, just flat, and then we put the tongue groove. In the closet in the bathroom, we used drywall. There's nothing wrong with using conventional blown-in cellulose on a flat ceiling. All it's going to do is come back down and become a little bit tighter. Now, here's an example on the right of a home of a particular floor plan called the Clarkston. The Clarkston has a structural timber frame running front to back, but on the second story, the customer wanted that vaulted, but didn't have the budget to put the fancy trusses. So one of the ways that we achieved that was to use structural ridge beams, and because the span from the ridge to the eave required a purlin, we used the same oak beams. We stained it the same color. So in this particular hybrid application, customers walk into the second story and think that my customer lives in a fully timber framed home. They don't. It's a hybrid. However, by going this way, they probably saved themselves 30 to 40, or who knows, maybe even more than 40 grand in just using the timber structurally instead of the big trusses up in those areas. So those are some of the different things that you're going to see with hybriding. But then there's also my own personal work. I'd like to show you a photo now. This is actually my personal office at home. There were two areas I wanted to timber frame in my house. I just simply didn't have the budget for it. It was my dining room and my office. And as you can see from these photos, these four timbers, I refer to them, it's my own personal word, they're trimbers. They literally do nothing. We could go remove those timbers, the room remains standing. But what I was able to do by timber framing the hybrid area, I was able to get that timber frame feel into that area of the house without the expense. So I want to touch on two more important points when you're building a timber frame. And one of the things that I like to do with every project that I'm hired is I want to go see the site, because as designing the home, I want to understand what the views are. But there's another thing. I need to make sure that I can get my product from my factory onto your job site. And one of the things that we do want customers to understand, all of our product is shipped on 48-foot long semi-load trailers. So sometimes we have job sites where there's switchbacks, or there's certain areas where we just can't get our semi in. So one of the things that I like to do and make my clients very, very much aware of this beginning of the process is make sure that there's full site accessibility where we can get each semi-load up there. Sometimes we have to negotiate maybe with a local lumberyard, deliver there, have it shuttled up. But that's part of the process that any manufacturer should do, and it's certainly a process that I'll help each and every one of you with as you go down through here. But again, you want to make sure that your site has access. You want to make sure you get the snow off the site, because the last thing you want is your timber frame stuck on the road like this, and guess what that truck is doing? It's blocking the whole road. So you want to make sure you do have site accessibility for your timber frame. But one of the other really critically important things as you go through the process is understand who's going to raise the timber frame. Now, here at Timbercraft, one of the things that we offer our clients is a technical rep. We'll send one person out. If you and your friends or you and your general contractor want to stand up the timber frame, we will show you and we'll help assist. Because actually the timber trusses, when they're laying on a deck and we're about to fly them up and we've assembled them, it's actually when they're most fragile. So we want to make sure that they're picked up in the right possible location. Another service that we offer here at Timbercraft is a 4-man full install crew, where 4 guys show up, we erect a timber frame, and we know exactly how it goes together. So those are some of the different options that you're going to have as you're building these timber frames. But one of the things that's very, very, very important to make sure, and we try and help our customers estimate with, is a crane. Now, with all the change in DOT laws, 8 or 9 years ago, I finally sold my 28-ton crane. Usually, most of us in the timber frame industry are going to rely on a local crane to come help erect the structure. And a crane is like a taxi. If you set 8 timbers in 8 hours, or you set 80 timbers in 8 hours, guess what? The cost is exactly the same. So you want to make sure that you definitely have someone who's an experienced tech rep that can get out there. You want to make sure, if you're going to work with your general contractor, that he has guys that are comfortable being harnessed in walking beams 20 or 30 feet in the air. So let's talk about, how do you actually get the ball rolling? How do you get started? All of us in the timber frame industry have different stock floor plans. Here at Timbercraft, we have one particular floor plan we build all the time. It's called the Clarkston. But that only represents maybe 3 to 5% of the homes that we build. Usually what's happening in the timber frame industry is that we're taking a little of this plan, a little of that plan, or oftentimes we're working with you guys on hand sketches in different odds and ends. So if you want to get started and you want to build a timber frame, please do me a favor. My email's here. Bob@Timbercraft. Please email that over. But one of the things that I must have to be able to build your timber frame is I must know exactly where you're going to be building, because I need to size out windows or size things like that. So go ahead and send that over, and I'll be glad to get the ball rolling. And the one thing that I'm able to do very early in the process is, and this is before you even engage your architect, if you have a floor plan, I'll be able to, if I know the location, I'll be able to quote you the timber frame, the tongue and groove, and the civil walls and roof. And I do need to get my hands on that, and that way, and I want to make sure that I'm keeping that in an area where it's going to go ahead and it's going to fit your budget. And basically, when we draw a structure, we go ahead, I actually draw a rude and crude 3D model of exactly what is your timber frame going to look like. And then I'll go ahead and extrapolate. I'll remove the walls and the roof. That way you can understand exactly what your timber frame is. Because one of the things that's really important is I want to be able to give each and every customer a range for where their timber frame is going to come in at, and make sure that my vision and your vision sync, and this is the timber frame that you do want to build. So again, I'd like to pass my contact information along to you. It's bob@timbercraft.com, our telephone number. And one other cool thing, if you get a chance, please go to our company Facebook page. This is probably the most interesting social media that we have here at Timbercraft, because one of the things that we do with our Facebook page is our customers get the opportunity to see the production, and we upload, sometimes daily, sometimes every other day, photos of the pre-fitting, the staining, all the work that we're doing to the timber frame. Then, once the timber frame is shipped out, our road crew actually will upload photos. That way customers can see what it looks like. And it's a lot of fun to go to these timber frame races and to see all this put together. And then here our admin staff here also uploads finished photos. So it's part of the process, it's real interactive, and it's a lot of fun. Now, one of the things with the Facebook, we do name the projects after cities, or maybe we name your property. We won't necessarily provide your specific name on the Facebook page. So it's a neat process. A funny story about our company Facebook page. There was a celebrity I built a timber frame for, and I had to sign an NDA. I couldn't let anyone know I was building for this customer. They got on our Facebook page, and the first thing they posted, "I'm so excited. I can't wait for this to be delivered at blah town." And I had to call up this person and say, "I don't know if you know, you just kind of let the cat out of the bag that you're building a timber frame." And so I helped him actually create a different, we took his name, spelled it backwards, and he logged in, and then he made the same comments again. So I was able to take that down. That way the public didn't realize it was him. But anyways, building a timber frame is a lot of fun, and all of us here at Timbercraft would love the opportunity to be of assistance. We would love to help you through the process. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead here in just a second, turn this back over to Amanda. The other thing I did want to point out to you, we will move on to the question and answers portion. If for some reason we don't have enough time to answer all the questions, I will personally respond back via phone, email, and answer those questions. And also, this webinar is going to be loaded up on our YouTube page. If you're watching this a month, a year, 2 years after it's aired, do me a favor, please email any questions you have to Bob@Timbercraft. But if you have any questions you'd like to have answered now, we'll go ahead and do what we can. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Bob, for a great presentation. Joining Bob tonight from Timbercraft is James Miller. He's going to help Bob get through the questions tonight. Just as a quick reminder, you can ask questions through your control panel. There is a questions tab, and if you go in there, you'll be able to type in your questions, and we'll start working through those this evening and get through as many as possible. As Bob mentioned, the ones we don't get through, we will go ahead and reach out to you directly, and there'll also be a follow-up after this. So Bob, James, you guys ready to go?
Yes, we are.
Awesome, awesome. So one of the first questions, and an easy one here, is where are your milling facilities located for Timbercraft?
Well, right now here at Timbercraft, we do all of our manufacturing in Tecumseh, Michigan, and we ship all throughout the country. We have sales offices in Omaha, Nebraska, as well as just outside in Gig Harbor, Washington. So at any point, if any customer has a timber frame, we'd love to see if we can possibly be of service and help them out.
Great, thanks, Bob. Can you take some time and explain the importance of housing timber frame joints versus not housing timber frame joints again for us?
Sure, no problem. I'll go ahead and I'll take this one. Basically, in traditional timber framing, when you have a post and you have an intersecting girt or rafter, typically those would butt up to each other and just the tenon would actually plug into the beam. But because all of that joinery used to be covered with lath and plaster, as it shrank, you didn't see the separation. And if it was a box heartwood where it checked and it wanted to twist and turn a little bit, all of that happened behind the scenes. But now that we've moved all of this timber framing inside where it's all visible, joinery is more important now today than ever before. So that's why with the house joinery, instead of just the tenon going in, we go ahead and cut a pocket for the whole member. So if there is shrinkage that happens inside, you don't necessarily see it. But the key here is particularly with box heartwood, as it checks and it moves, it's constrained. It's inside of a pocket, so you're not going to have that same type of twisting and see it because the joinery will hold it together. And personally, a traditional timber frame is great, but I just really think where our focus should be as an industry is on the joinery, making it as tight as possible, because this home is going to outlast the traditional stick-built home. These homes last 100, 200, 300 years, assuming proper walls and maintenance are done on the exterior to keep the elements out. So it's a good way to go. Sometimes competitors will say, oh, Bob and those guys over at Timbercraft are going to sell you larger posts. Well, guilty, because a lot of our timber frame great rooms are 18, 19, 20 feet wide. And so oftentimes we're using an 8x beam. So to house an 8x beam, we tend to have a 10x10 post. But the other thing is, when you work with smaller timbers, and let's say your ceiling height is 23 feet tall, if you use a 6x beam, it'll almost look like a toothpick. So I kind of think a little bit bigger, more mass is more aesthetically pleasing.
Great information. Next question, what is the general time frame from start to finish to build a timber frame home?
Well, let me kick it to you in terms of design. How long do you typically see the design process? Because it's kind of design and manufacturing.
Right. And what I see in design a lot is for a custom home, start to finish is usually between 6 to 9 months. Sometimes it can run a year as far as that goes. Really, it's client driven. Depending on your changes and your speed of getting information back to us, it can take, typically it's from 6 to 9 months up to a year.
So once the house is designed and then it's time to actually move into fabrication, here at Timbercraft we have 2 CNC Hundigger milling machines, and so our typical lead time is usually in the neighborhood of 8 to 10 weeks. However, for every company, be it log and timber frame companies, as we get into the spring, our lead times are going to grow, because basically once we get to the middle of January, our phones start really ringing. We start getting a lot of orders. So in the spring, our lead times tend to push out a little bit. Same could actually be said, funny enough, for the month of September, because in the month of September, you've got winter coming up real quickly. So a lot of people will place their deposits and they want to get the structures erected. That way throughout the winter they can plug away on the interior of the home and deal with those items.
And something to add to that too is usually the winter time is the trade show season. So you get the opportunity to go to some shows scattered around the country and talk to actual timber framers personally in a booth, and that kind of starts rolling the clock too on some designs.
Absolutely.
Thank you, guys. Next up, will you work with plans that are not from your company?
Well, that's a tricky question. It's a tricky question. We will not take up set of plans made by ABC company over here and specifically build that timber frame. But if you have created a floor plan, if you have sketched a floor plan and you've taken it to an architect or a timber framer, you are the author of those sets of plans. But if you're going into ABC's plan book and you want to build just their floor plan, that's something none of us in our industry can do. But if you have, a lot of people come to us with plans. I mean, you see them at Home Depot, just general. General floor plan books. We have to redesign the foundation anyways because of the point loads, and so oftentimes there's still a little bit of design work that we need to do. But yeah, we can absolutely help you if you have a floor plan. I just can't specifically build a timber frame floor plan from timber frame company ABC. But the fact of the matter is, this last weekend I was at the Log and Timber Show in Kansas City, Missouri, and a customer showed me a competitor's floor plan, which was almost identical to our Clarkston floor plan. So I was able to show them our Clarkston, and we're able to make some modifications, the same sort of modifications they wanted to make to that other company's floor plan.
Great information. Next up, how do you ensure that your timber frame joinery will fit, and how do you determine how long a crane will be needed when raising a timber frame home?
Great questions. Well, every timber frame manufacturer is going to kind of answer this question differently. Here at Timbercraft, one of the things that we do is something called a pre-fit. And just because our machine cuts accurately doesn't necessarily mean that the knives didn't slip, that something didn't move. So one of the processes that we use here in our shop is pre-fit, where everything is fit front to back and left to right. The only thing you'll actually see us here at Timbercraft do on a job site, we actually leave our posts 4 additional inches long for whatever variation. Being a kid that grew up on the West Coast that lives in the Midwest, I've seen earthquakes, hurricanes, and now I see tornadoes and heavy snow loads. So one of the things that we do here at Timbercraft, we actually take our posts, instead of just putting them on the subfloor, we actually take them down and put them on the treated sill. We attach them to the foundation. That way it's nice and rock and solid. But one of the challenges you have, particularly with concrete, is concrete can move. It can go up and down a little bit. Now, we're leaving 4 inches, but typically, what are you seeing? We're normally adjusting like half an inch, three quarters of an inch. So we're just slightly adjusting these posts, but
and I'll say the other thing is, earlier in the presentation, there was a photo of our joinery out on sawhorses in the shop. And what you can see there, if you were able to catch it, was actually pencil lines or marker lines actually in the joint. And that actually represent that a piece was already put in place and then was labeled to make sure that when it's going out to site, everything's fitted together already. So everything's just going to go right back in place. And everything's got a number system and a grid on it. So it connects together out back on site. So we assemble everything, take it all apart, and then stack it up, ship it out to you guys, and it quickens the pace of your crane usage.
A typical 2,000 square foot timber frame takes us usually about 3 days to fully erect it, because we've already put it together front to back and left to right. Because honestly, if there's a mistake, I can't really run to Home Depot and buy another timber. So I need to make sure that we catch it in our shop. And because we house our joints, we're actually pre-finishing it, staining it, polyurethane it, doing whatever the different finishes are. So all of that actually takes place here in the shop. But based on our experience, that will also tell us how long we will need a crane on a job site. One of the things with timber frames, the typical crane size that's needed, unless you're building this major large, 7,000, 8,000 square foot home. If you're building a 2,000 or 3,000 square foot home, typically the crane will be a 24-ton crane, and a typical timber frame raise is going to be about 3 days of crane time that we'll need it. Unofficially, it tends to work out however long we need the crane to raise the timber frame. It's almost the same for the insulated panels, and for every one of our jobs, we help our customers find a crane. We explain to the crane that we need a spreader bar. We give them all the different details that they need as they go through the process.
Great information, guys. I think we have time for about one more question here, and then we'll get wrapped up. Okay. What wood species do you recommend, and is there one that's more cost effective?
It's another good question.
It's a great question. The best wood species to use is actually one that visually appeals to you. Unless you're building in an area that have really heavy snow loads. Douglas fir shines in areas like that. Oak performs fairly well. But ultimately, we'll design the timber frame to the style and feel that you need. That's really your department.
It's all kind of customer driven there too. Like Bob had talked about, like when you get into different snow loads and different areas where you actually have to maybe space your vents out closer together to get a wood species to work. There's a way to use any species really at any location, but I see it all the time as just client driven. If you like oak is more rustic feeling to it, with the checks, the box heart, a lot of knots, different, grain patterns to it. And Doug fir is a little more streamlined, a little less knots, and a lot less checking. But it's all client really driven on that.
Now, for example, I also have a job that just recently came in where it's out in Missouri, and it's a very light snow load. One of the wood species that the customer is asking me for is white pine. The white pine is just a slightly more economical wood species for us to buy, so there's a little bit of a savings. But I think typically we're seeing Douglas fir and oak frames, pine frames, usually within 3 to 5% of the overall cost when we build the homes.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome. Great, you guys. As I mentioned, I think that's all the time we have for questions this evening. There are more questions coming in. Bob and team will make sure they touch base with those that we have left unanswered. We would like to thank you for joining us this evening. And on behalf of Timbercraft and Timber Home Living, we'd like to thank you for joining us. And we're going to leave you with a video here from Timbercraft. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Timber framing is one of the oldest styles of construction in the world. In fact, it dates all the way back to the Old Testament. That's why we traveled to Michigan and met up with one of the world's greatest timber frame manufacturers, Timbercraft. For over 40 years, Timbercraft has been perfecting the art of timber framing with state-of-the-art design and manufacturing techniques. Timbercraft has taken it to a whole new level.
Here at Timbercraft, we are architectural craftsmen that design, manufacture, and install heavy timber frame structures, both for residential and commercial use. Our company was founded in 1978, and our mission is to honor our creator and our craft. What makes Timbercraft a very unique and amazing company is we do a type of construction that's over 2,000 years old. However, we've modernized it. Now we've brought it into our manufacturing facilities, so it's a controlled environment with CNC equipment. We actually service the entire country, and we build internationally. When you build in different geographic areas, you have different constraints that you have to deal with. On the West Coast, you have earthquakes and seismics, or in the mountains, you have heavy snow load. We have the experience to help our customers go through that process and bring their ideas to life and build their dream timber frame home.
With a full in-house design and engineering team, Timbercraft is able to design and build structures anywhere in North America. Their focus is to design a timber frame structure that fits each individual client's budget.
Every timber frame that we manufacture is going to be very unique because our clientele's wants and needs are very different, and we're customizing each project for our customers. Some of our customers have been blessed with multi-million-dollar budgets, and some of our other customers have much more modest budgets. But one of the great things about a timber frame is anyone could have these big exposed beams. The way that we achieve that is through a process called hybrid. A hybrid timber frame is where you focus the timber framing in high-use areas of the home, possibly the kitchen, the dining room, the great room, the master bedroom, a covered porch, the main areas in the house where you actually live. Then as you get into other areas like the breezeway, closets, a guest bedroom, go ahead and conventionally build those.
With their unique style and attention to detail, Timbercraft's quality and craftsmanship is unmatched by others in their industry.
At Timbercraft, we're dedicated to a particular style of mortise and tenon joinery called the house joint. The house joint is where, instead of just the tenon going into a beam, the whole member goes in and then the tenon. And the reason that we do that is as wood dries, it wants to shrink and twist. And when it's in a pocket, you don't see that shrinkage. And if it wants to twist, it can't actually go anywhere. So the process that we do in manufacturing is we take and hand select each and every timber. Then all that detailed joinery is milled on our CNC machines, but that's only part of the process. After that, our skilled craftsmen go ahead, take these timbers, and we pre-fit or pre-assemble the entire structure, front to back and left to right. We want to make sure that it's a very tight fit and that it's perfectly accurate. And once we're done with that, we go ahead, disassemble the entire structure, label it, stain it and ship it however the customer wants, and then at that point, it's off to be built. But the key to this whole process is our house joint. It ensures that our Timbercraft timber frame is going to look exactly the same today as it does 100, 200, or 300 years from now.
As one of the world's greatest timber frame design and build firms, Timbercraft buildings are built for life.